Hi everyone, my name is Holly Grant. I'm the Grants and Programming Director for ASI, and I am going to talk to you today about developing your program budget. This is one area that we get a lot of questions on, specifically with our grant making. It is also an area where we see a lot of our grant applicants lose some points on their application as they kind of struggle to understand how to develop an accurate and appropriate program budget. So we're going to talk about developing a program budget that ensures not only that your program is a success, but that you hopefully can get some grant funding because of it. So let's talk about how you do this and why it is so important. So starting pretty basic, what is a program budget? So a budget specifically is an estimation of anticipated revenue and expenses over a specified future period of time. It is a plan that helps you manage your money. Program budgets specifically are a projection of everything you expect to spend and earn tied to a specific event, project, or activity. Why are they so important? Well, budgets are a really great way to keep yourself on track so you can meet your goals. Budgets keep you focused and organized so you're not spending money you don't have, you don't want to go into debt. And they're a great way to determine whether or not your program is successful. They're also really great reference points for future projects. If a budget is maintained accurately, future projects and their budgets are quick and easy to put together. I do want to point out that budgets are a projection, they're an estimation, so they are not set in stone and they can be adapted. That being said, they should always be thoughtful and intentional and include as much detail and planning as possible. To be really effective, they should be as close to accurate as possible, but knowing that things happen. Not all the money comes through, sometimes things cost more than expected, but they should be as close as possible. When you develop a program budget, keep in mind this is event planning. So if you say you're good at event planning, it implies you are good at program budgeting as well. For a budget to be accurate, you have to know what to expect and when. This means you have to take the time to fully plan your program and really understand everything that needs to happen and when they need to happen. And that will all be reflected in your budget. So let's start with some common budget vocabulary. We're going to start with the money in, so revenue. Revenue is the total amount of income generated by the sale of goods or services. Your money in. And there are two different kinds of revenue. So there are earned revenues and contributed revenue. Earned revenue is the money you receive in exchange for a product, good, or service. So this is going to be things like your ticket sales or registration, sale of artwork, concessions, merchandise, program ads, commissions, or compensation for teaching or performing. So this is someone giving you money and getting something back in return. This is often considered unrestricted revenue. You can spend this money however you need to. It is not restricted for a specific purpose. On the flip side is contributed revenue. So this is money that is gifted to you without the expectation of an exchanged good or service. So this will include your grants, donations, sponsorships, product. You're not always getting cash, sometimes you get a thing, and in-kind contributions, which I will talk about a bit more in a moment because I know that is a confusing one. So often contributed revenue is restricted. It is considered restricted income. And this means that it can only be used for the purpose in which it was intended when it was given. So for example, if you receive a grant, you can only spend that grant money on what you said you would spend it on. You can't go on vacation or anything else outside of that, right? So it is a restricted gift. All right, let's talk about in-kind contributions. So in-kind contributions are non-monetary gifts of goods or professional services. They're typically offered free of charge or at a discount. So these must always have some value attached to them. They're professional. They are things that you would normally purchase. So some examples would be professional time or service, space rental, venue rental, materials such as lumber, paint supplies, paper, fabric, or product. So printed programs, advertising, costumes, something like that. Because these are things that you typically would have to pay for but are either being given to you or discounted, they would be in your budget as both revenue and an expense. They need to balance out. If it is not something that you would typically pay for, it cannot be considered income. So when you're developing your budget, especially for our grants, you need to make sure that you're listing, if you have an in-kind revenue listed, it absolutely must have a corresponding expense line. And this is helpful for your budget because you know in the future, if you do this program again, you may not get it donated. So you have an idea of how much it's going to cost if you do have to pay for it. So in-kind contributions are amazing, but keep in mind that they are considered both revenue and expenses. So let's talk about expenses. Expenses are any cost incurred while doing business or executing a program. So this will be your money going out. And there are two kinds of expenses, direct and indirect. When we talk about program budgets, we really are talking about direct expenses. So these are going to be products, activities, or services that are directly tied to that specific program or project. So this will include staff or artist time, supplies, materials, equipment, rent, marketing, licensing or rights, event insurance, travel and lodging. There are many others, and I'll give you some more examples of common expenses in a moment. But these are things that you have to spend money on for that project. If you were not doing this program, you would not have these expenses. They are directly tied to doing that work. Indirect expenses, on the other hand, are things that extend beyond your project. So they're things that you pay for that may not be tied to that. So in a business, you're going to see this as things like rent or utilities of a regularly maintained space, a studio or an office space, maybe a payroll expense or other administrative fees. If you have a website and you're paying for that web hosting, regardless of whether or not you do this event, that is still an expense you are paying. General liability or workers' comp insurance, if most businesses have those, and you're paying for them regardless of whether or not you do the program. So these are expenses you would typically not include in a program budget, but they are things that you're spending money on. You're just keeping them separate. So let's walk through an example. So ASI is going to be the example. We are hosting, for the sake of this conversation, an in-person workshop, training workshop on maybe how to get grant funding. And we're doing it at an off-site venue. We are not doing it in our office. The revenue we are receiving is a grant to offer this free training for anyone who's seeking funding. The expenses we have tied to this workshop specifically. Our direct expenses will include renting the venue where the workshop is held. Remember, we have an office. This workshop that we're talking about is not held there, so we have to pay a separate rent specifically for this workshop. We like to have printed materials just because not everyone consumes their content electronically, so we do electronic and printed. There is a cost with printing, so that is a direct expense. Let's say I'm the one presenting, so my time spent developing this content and leading the presentation is directly tied to this workshop. I would not be spending my time doing that if we weren't doing this, so therefore the time that it costs, the number of hours, and my pay rate gets tied to this project. Let's say it is a little bit of a drive. So I have to travel there and I can submit for mileage reimbursement. That is a direct expense. And then because we like to make sure that people are fed and focused, we have some snacks and refreshments, and I have to purchase those. I would not be purchasing them without this workshop, so that is tied to this workshop as a direct expense. Some of the indirect expenses that ASI has, we have a website, we pay for it all year round. Probably going to promote this fictional workshop on there, but there's a lot of other things there as well. It is not created specifically for this, so it is an indirect expense. It does not get charged to this budget. We have general liability insurance in case someone hurts themselves while doing this workshop or anything else. Maybe we damage the property or the venue that we rent. That insurance would kick in, but we have it and it is not specifically for this. We pay for a Microsoft Office Suite software, creating my presentation in PowerPoint. Some of the handouts are in Excel or Word. Again, we're using them for other purposes as well, not just this, so it is an indirect expense. Maybe the venue we go to does not have a projector or a screen or a computer, so I have to bring all of that stuff that ASI owns. It is already stuff we own. We did not purchase it specifically for this, so it is an indirect expense. And then obviously, I went to work and created this material in our office, but we're paying for this office space regardless, so we would not charge this. This is an indirect expense. It is also on our books. It is in our general operating budget. It is not tied to this program budget. So hopefully that kind of helps delineate between direct expenses and indirect. So one last thing I want to talk about is your gross versus net. And this is a little confusing, but they're common terms that you've probably heard. So gross is going to be the total revenue that you bring in. All the money you bring in is your gross revenue, right? Total amount of cash coming in versus your net. This is how much money is left over after everything has been paid. So you brought in your money, you paid all your bills, and then you either have a profit or a surplus or a loss or deficit. A quick thing about those two words there, they are typically differentiated between whether or not you are a for-profit or a nonprofit business. So for-profits have profit and loss. Nonprofits and government entities typically work in surplus deficit. And the reason for this is nonprofit has different laws where you cannot just pay major bonuses and pay stakeholders any profit or proceeds or surplus. It has to be reinvested into your work. Versus in the for-profit, you could just give yourself a big bonus and go on vacation. You don't have to reinvest that into your business. So similar concept, just slightly different words, depending on the type of business you run. Okay, so let's actually develop your budget. Let's talk through some common budget items that we see in our project budgets. And we're gonna start with expenses. When you're developing your budget, you really do wanna think about how much it's gonna cost, what it's gonna take to do your project. So some of the common budget expenses we receive for arts budgets, your artists, your creatives, your performers, please always pay people for their time, pay yourself for your time. In this industry, we really love to just donate our time, and we love this so much that we're willing to do it, but it creates an inequity. For those who cannot afford to not be paid, they lose out on a lot of opportunities. So we really want to advocate for every artist and creative involved to be compensated for their time, skill, and talent. Similarly, the administrative and logistical expenses, there's direct expenses tied to this, so you're not paying for someone's full administrative salary, but the number of hours that they are working on this project, you can always put those into a project budget. And if you do a lot of state contracts or larger grants, they actually want you to track your hours on the administrative side. So this is a really good practice to get into anyway. Venue rental, again, if you're using a venue that is not yours for rehearsals or studio space or the actual performance or exhibition, you may need to pay for a rental. Marketing or advertising, how are people hearing about it? Yes, email and social media are fabulous, but sometimes you need to put a little money behind that to reach a larger audience. Hospitality, your refreshments, you want to make sure that, if you're working in the performing arts, we really want to keep our artists hydrated. We want to make sure they are not going to pass out on stage. So we do a lot of hospitality behind the scenes. In the visual arts world, we do a lot of receptions, opening receptions, so that's going to fall under your hospitality costs. Event insurance, if you're an individual or you don't carry general liability insurance, you may have to purchase one-time event insurance, so that is another common expense we see. And then again, those programs or handouts, whatever you want to give to the audience to kind of help them understand the event that they are attending. There's usually a printing cost associated with that. In the performing arts, we see a few other unique expenses, such as your designers, your directors, your choreographers, your rehearsal accompanists, calling out a few other artists and creatives who are sometimes forgotten about because they are a bit more behind the scenes. Your sets and props, costumes, licensing or rights. If you're producing someone else's work or performing someone else's work in theater or music, you may need to pay for some rights to do so. On the visual arts end, your paint, your brushes, your canvases, framing of the work, shipping. If it's going out of the area, you may have to cover shipping costs. Wall prep or repair, if you're doing a mural, You might need to prep the wall depending on how porous it is or what it is made of. You may need more or less product. Repair, if you have some heavier pieces that really need to be bolted in, it may damage the wall when it comes out. You may be responsible for repairing it. So just kind of keeping an eye on those things, reading contracts and making sure you understand what you are responsible for versus the venue. Some other expenses that we see depending on the project, documentation. This is a big one. Yes, we all think we can just take photos and videos of our work, but when we're in it, we are busy, we are focused, we are doing the things. So if you're able to budget for someone else to come in, a professional photographer or videographer, it is so helpful to know that is being taken care of and you can focus on what you need to focus on while the program is taking place, right? So budget to pay someone else to document for you. And then this is great to have afterwards to build portfolios or promote future events. Grant reporting, we do ask for some documentation, so you can submit that with grant reporting as well. Credit card fees. If you are charging tickets or registration and people are allowed to use a credit card to pay, there are going to be fees attached to that. So make sure you know what those are. Depending on the platform, there's different percentages. That is an expense. You will have to budget for that. Merchandise or concessions. If you tell us you're selling those, you probably also need to be purchasing those. So that is something that is going to be both in your expense line and probably in your revenue line. Permits or contracts. If you want to do, let's say, an outdoor concert in a park, whatever city or town or village you're in may require a permit for that. So just double check. There might be some small fees attached to that. Storage rental. You're creating something and you can't quite get into the venue, but you also need it stored somewhere. You may have to pay for storage. This would also include maybe like a moving truck or larger vehicles to transport. Equipment. If you need specific equipment to either rent or purchase for your event, such as cameras, microphones, amplifiers, speakers, lighting, maybe you need to rent a stage or a platform, those could be tied to your project. Software, specifically for editing, designing, layout, demonstration. This would be something that you need specifically for this project and that you're not already paying for. If you work with other contractors, there are others we could sometimes see brought into the fold, so like fabricators, engineers, designers, consultants, anything like that. And then there might be other supplies that you need, again, to either purchase or rent. So if you need ladders, air compressors, other tools, instruments, uniforms, something like that. So really thinking through your entire project and everything that could possibly come up, you need to build that into your budget. When you're building this expenses, try as often as possible to get actual costs, get price quotes. Don't just guess. This is important. So one, you have an accurate budget. You really fully understand the true cost it takes to do this work. But also if you're applying for a grant, our grant panelists do this work for a living. They're going to know if you're making it up. If you're either underestimating or overestimating and inflating, they're going to know because they do this. So as much as possible, really try to get those actual costs. It also really helps you understand the true cost of your project and how much money you need to bring in. So the more work you can do up front getting costs and price quotes, the better off you will be in the long run. Okay, let's look at your money in. You have your expenses, right? And you've just tallied them up and they're pretty large and you're terrified, but now you got to come up with the money to pay for this, right? So some common budget revenue items that we see in arts program budgets. Your ticket sales or registration. Obviously, if you're applying for grants, we really like to see you remove that if possible. We want grants are charitable dollars, so we want to make sure that you can give your art to the community whenever possible. But if you need it, ticket sales and registration, if you can keep them low cost, are absolutely permissible. Art sales. Maybe you're doing an exhibition and you know on average you sell 6 pieces during an opening. That is revenue that you can kind of anticipate, but you have to know reasonably how much you expect to sell, right? Program ads, you're handing out a program booklet. Why not ask local businesses if they want to purchase an ad to promote themselves in it? It's small revenue, but it could be there. I also want to point out, if you're selling program ads, you're probably also printing a program booklet. And that means that will be both revenue and an expense, and our grant panels will look at that. Similarly with concessions and merchandise, as I mentioned, if If you're planning to sell them, you probably also need to be purchasing the product you are selling. So make sure if you don't have them in both, that in the budget notes sections, you are explaining why that is not an expense. If you already have some on hand and you're just selling them, great. But you'll need to call that out. And then on your contributed revenue side, grants, realistically, what grants you anticipate getting. Don't just pick a ridiculous amount and say you're going to make $80,000 in grants, because the average person receives 20% of the grants that they apply for. And anyone who does this regularly knows that, maybe you could be a little higher than that, but it is not likely you're going to get 100% of the grants you apply for. So try to be reasonable with that number. Donations, how many individuals are you expecting will give you money? If you are an individual yourself and you are contributing some of your personal money to this project, you can include that in this line. You are gifting your own money to this project. That is an individual donation. So you should include that if you need to balance your budget. And then sponsorships. Are any businesses willing to just give you a corporate sponsorship, give you some money to support the event? It's worth asking, it's worth considering, and it is a common revenue that we see in budgets. So you're gonna find, especially if you really get the actual costs, that this budget is gonna be pretty massive, and it's gonna be hard to raise all the money you need to make this happen successfully. So really, once you kind of have like your big picture dream budget, sit down and figure out what are your non-negotiables with your program, right? What absolutely do you need to be part of this program? And some questions you really want to look at, like, who is this for? Who are you doing this for? What do they need? What are they going to get out of it? What is the desired outcome of this? Where do you want this to take place? That will determine what venues are available to you. When do you want it to take place? Does it have to take place in summer? Could it happen anytime throughout the year? That may impact your budget. And who do you want involved? If you know you absolutely must have this person, or you must have 3 other people involved, but you could go up to 6, or you must have this one person, but you could add 2 more. What are your non-negotiables, and where is there wiggle room? Because yeah, you created your budget, but let's talk about realistic. You probably created your dream budget, right? This is, if I could do this, this is what it would look like. So you may want to draft a couple budgets, right? So you've got your dream budget. Here's exactly what I am envisioning and how much it will cost. But if I had to, I could do this program on this. Create your bare bones budget. What is the least amount of money you could do this program and still feel good about yourself, right? So where could you cut? Where can you get items for free? Like, what is the teeniest amount of money you could use? And then in between that, you're probably going to have your realistic budget. And this is what you would submit for your grant, right? Most likely you will, things will cost this. Likely you will bring in this much money. But that being said, having these multiple budgets helps you if, let's say, you get all the grants that you apply to. Oh my gosh, I have more money than I know what to do with. Actually, no, you do know what to do with it. You're going to buy the best quality products. You're going to hire those extra artists. You are going to add extra performances, create more work. You already know what that looks like to scale up. On the flip side, if you don't get as much money as you think, you know where you can cut. You already have your plan in place. You're just adapting and moving into whichever direction, hopefully the dream budget, but whichever direction you need. All right, your budget is done. But it's not over, unfortunately. So once you create your program budget, you still have to monitor, track, and update it. And I know, again, we want to do the arts part of this. We don't want to do the money part, but this is an essential part of event and program planning, right? So a few vocabulary words that are also action items: cash flow. Let's start there. So cash flow is tracking when money is coming in and going out. You really do need to understand this. So that you know how you can pay your bills. So think about, let's say part of your money is from a grant, part of your money is from ticket sales, and then you're also selling concessions. Hopefully that grant is coming in ahead of time, and that grant is going to cover any deposits or down payments that you need to pay. It is going to start to pay for some time, some supplies and materials, but you have some money to get started. Ticket sales kind of trickle in. We know Western New York tends to be a very last minute buying crowd, so Probably most of the money is going to come in right before the event, but you should get a little bit here and there. Concessions, you're not making any money on that until the event actually happens. So that is a last minute cash flow. So really understanding when your money is coming in and when your money needs to go out will help keep you on track, and it will make sure that you don't ever overextend yourself. Actuals. So when we say actuals, we mean it is the actual cost of whatever product or service you are buying. This is something you should be tracking as you go. So maybe you got a price quote 6 months ago for your grant budget when you put it together, but the cost has now doubled, right? It is important to know that. Or maybe you were able to get a discount, or maybe the price went down. It is helpful on your budget to have one column that is for the budget and another column that is your actual cost. And you can kind of compare where the differences might be. Maybe one budget line went up for the actuals and the other budget line went down. And at the end of the day, your budget is still pretty neutral. It is right on target, but different expense lines may have been up or down. That is helpful to know for future planning. Reconciliation. This is the process of reviewing everything, all of your transactions and documentation, and just making sure it's all taken care of, right? So, if somebody promised you that they were going to give you some money for this, did they actually pay? Check in. Hey, did we receive that? Did it come through? Did this grant payment come through? Checking on that. On the reverse end, did you actually pay everything you need to? So sitting down like, hey, here are all the invoices, here are the contracts I have to pay out. Did I do these? Because you don't want to get the reputation of not paying your bills. That is a bad thing. The other thing is to check if you pay by cash or check, have all the checks been cashed? So just because you're looking at your bank account saying, oh, I've got this much money in there, do you really? Is there someone who has not cashed their check yet? That could be $1,000 check that hasn't cleared and you have $1,200 in that bank account, right? So you may want to know that. So reconciliation is just kind of checking in and making sure everything is in order. And then organize your files. Whether you keep everything electronically or physically, you want to make sure that all your receipts, invoices, and contracts are neat, organized, and clearly labeled. And this really will help you at the end of the year. One, for reconciliation at the end of the event, but also when you do your taxes. So if you're a for-profit or individual, you're going to have to pay taxes on everything. But if you have receipts or invoices or contracts, you can write some of this off as a business expense, but you need that documentation to do that. On the other side, nonprofits, you're probably getting a review or audited financials, and those auditors are going to be like, hey, where's this invoice? I need to see it. Just to make sure no one's embezzling money or misspending money, right? That's part of the process. So making sure you have all of that neat and handy and organized will help you at the end of the day, or specifically the end of the year. So just to recap, budgeting is event planning, and you really do need to pay attention to what you are doing. It is a vital part of your program's success. And honestly, it's a really vital thing to have if you hope to get grant funding. We do look at those, we do take those seriously, and we want to make sure that you can manage your money and the grant money that we are going to be giving you. If you have any questions at any point as you are working on your grant for ASI, please reach out. I am happy to help. Specifically about budgets, I know we get a lot of questions, so I'm happy to take a look at them, meet with you, sit and talk about whatever you need. Just let me know what you need. You can email me or give me a call. But thank you so much and good luck. I really hope that this was helpful, and I can't wait to see all of the amazing program budgets that are going to be coming out.